Well, welcome to the show, everybody. How are you this fine morning? There's a lot going on sort of internationally, nationally, proto-nationally. There's so many elements of this that are fascinating to me as the world attempts to normalize what is effectively a major shift in the back to the current abnormal in terms of America's stance in the world, America's position in the world. And when it comes to a shift like we're looking for, and Johnny, I don't know why all of a sudden I lost your video on the stream, but we will figure that part of it out in just a moment. Yeah, it's curious to me. It might be that I freaked out my stream thing. It might be that everything works so wonderfully, and then this is what happens when I try to. It's so cuckoo. Anyways, so over the course of the last few weeks, the right-wing storyline on all of these, on the upcoming Biden trip overseas, the President G summit, any of the policies that are going up, any of that stuff is resulting in a lot of ways in this kind of clamoring that the world is ending. It's not just that there are some difficulties. It's not just that there's the normal aspects of international relationships that have dogged the United States for years or been a source of support. There he is. Now he came up. Now it's finally come back up. That's great. I'm a little choppy, but you look great. So over the as we've led up to this, the storyline that we've seen repeatedly is that Biden is ruining the world, and Trump had it just where it needed to be, and we were this close. If they'd only built the last 4 panels of the wall, there would be no immigration problem. If we'd have just continued with his tariffs on China / his big deal for China, then
we just continued to not have any plan to vaccinate the nation.
Yeah, it would have just purged. We would have had, how many jobs would have been filled because so many people wouldn't be alive to fill those jobs? Like unemployment goes down when, because dead people don't file for UI, I think is the issue there. So there has been a lot of the big storyline is that, of course, that Biden was going to wreck everything as soon as he came in. And in terms of the Trump presidency, it turned out that it had a freshness date, that there was a best used by date of January 20th of this year, because apparently within weeks, everything accomplished, with the exception of the giant corporate tax he gave, of course, the one for individuals was temporary, but the ones for for corporations was permanent. And in doing that, he has basically wiped out the entirety of the Trump presidency in the same way that a lot of people were complaining about the fact that here comes Trump and just wiping out as many of
Obama things,
of Obama's things as he could, except for things like the ACA and DACA and these very resilient policies that, while some had been put through the legislature and therefore undoing a law is much more difficult, and then the executive orders that Obama put forward had been thoroughly vetted by the Department of Justice and the legal team at the White House, and had been put through the ringer so that if there were any challenges to it, they would withstand a legal challenge for the most part as best they could as executive orders. And then if anybody undid them, just by a stroke of the pen, it would be very hard for them to just do that. In the case of DACA is very specific in that you can't coax people out into the open. It was kind of like getting rid of don't ask, don't tell via executive order in that regard. Put people in a very precarious situation because the law hadn't been tested in that regard. So you might have a situation where people come out of the closet while they're in their military service. The next president undoes that that executive order, and these people are done for because they've already outed themselves. You can't go back into the closet afterwards. And the same thing applied to DACA. And that's one of the reasons why both have withstood a lot of the legal fights against them from the right. Now, the Biden administration, he had a stack of EOs on the first day he was there. These executive orders that were basically like, okay, no more of that, no more of that, no more of that, no more of that. It's just like, let's get back to normal policy. Even the 700% jump in us receiving refugees from all over the world, this stampeding 700% brings us back to the same number that Bush Sr. had when he was in office, but somewhere in the order of like 112 to 115,000 people a year. And after a tremendous amount of vetting, the difference between, of course, the numbers during Bush 1 and now, of course, is the vetting aspect of it, is that there is an extra level of vetting going on. Now, of course, Biden goes over, and the first thing you notice when you're looking at all this stuff is how happy and normal everyone looks in the pictures. Trump is not there to shove anybody out of the way. There's not this really awkward back and forth, with where there's no pictures of everyone surrounding Biden trying to talk sense into him over NATO. I don't know why we don't just collapse the whole thing. Pooty Poot told me it stinks, and therefore, and we even have. This summit that's coming up between Biden and Putin. It's going to happen at this 12th century villa, this little mini castle that's been happening there. Yeah, they got it as a strategic look. It's funny, one of these things where I'm sure the conspiracy theorists are going, kind of crazy about their meeting in this. It's probably the site of some, pagan ritualistic space, that's been, doused in adrenochrome or some nonsense. But the reality is it's very difficult for the Russians to sneak in beforehand and hide microphones in walls that are made out of granite, over 1,000 years ago. So, 800 years ago. And so in terms of, just safety and all that stuff, like checking out a venue, I would imagine that the Secret Service and other places this place is basically stone. You're not hiding any, and if you hide anything in here, it's in the fixtures. We can manage that. We can follow that. So over the course of watching, the two of these guys meet, especially considering the relationship we have with Russia right now, the recent hackings. The obvious state-aligned actors that are attacking our meat processing plants, our gas pipelines and stuff. And it's no surprise, by the way, that the Republicans are running on this idea that, they respected Trump. And so therefore they don't respect Biden, and therefore that's why they're attacking us. Well, first of all, they did attack us during Trump, and nothing was made of it. And we'll talk a little bit about something I mentioned on my stream this week, that the Biden team has formed a ransomware task force that retrieved Bitcoin that was stolen.
That was kind of an amazing headline.
Yeah, and it made Bitcoin and all these other cryptocurrencies drop because of that. And that in of itself is a story that will hold.
Because I did wonder, what happens if we put the full force of our intelligence behind this?
Yeah, and the idea that we somehow can't do that, and a lot of these folks, quite frankly, it's not surprising that they think they're safe behind this wall of cryptocurrency, and have for quite some time, because no one's tried. Because no one was, because during the Trump administration, there was this kind of stand down on Russia order as much as they could in the DOJ and at CISA. And then, of course, after the election, Trump fired the head of CISA because he didn't agree with him that the election was stolen. And this is the guy who's, the head of the organization that would fight back against ransomware attacks and all these kind of things. So he removed the head of the department, replaced him with someone below there who was basically a suck up. And then it took the Biden administration a little while to get their person in. And during that gap, we find out this is when all these ransomware attacks are happening, because there's basically no one minding the store in a greater sense. And there's not a strategy in place. Once the strategy gets in place, oh my God, the first ever ransomware retrieval of Bitcoin using a break into the Bitcoin wallet by the people who committed this ransomware attack, which caused a huge dip in the market.
So amazing.
It's
not to totally derail, but like along the same lines, did you hear about the FBI's fake private messaging app that decimated Australia's organized crime?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah, tell them. Yeah.
They're going to be like, now that it's out there, I was like, oh no, well now everybody knows. But the sub-headline said they're going to be arrests for years and years,
right,
from all of the information that they gathered, because people thought that they were communicating on some new private messaging app, and it was run by the friggin' FBI.
I have to say, I'm a little bit convinced that Parler was a psyop because it was so pitifully run and so moronically protected. I mean, they used the demo version of the security software and then refused to pay for the full version, which is like a monthly fee of like $15. It was, wow. It was, and then 7 terabytes of information from Parler dumped on the web, including the full photos. And Parler stores the metadata for your photos that you upload. When you upload a photo to Twitter or Facebook, like Facebook had this thing a long time ago that included that stuff, and now they don't anymore. And basically what they do is you post a copy of the photo on your website. It doesn't take the metadata from your phone and say, this is where it was shot, this is who's in it. You have to add all that stuff
this is where that Confederate flag is that I'm posing in front of.
Parler allowed all that stuff, it just took all that information, where you were, your latitude and longitude at the moment you took the photo, what your phone is, all the details.
But don't get that vaccine.
Yeah, but that's right, because you'll get tracked by nanobots, right? That's the big thing, right? We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. I want to talk about a couple of the biggest hits against Trump that are happening at the G7 as the world is, quite frankly, literally moving on from the Trump era as if it never existed in a lot of ways. And it's going to take a little while to get over some of the damage that he did just to our national psyche and the dent he put in our ethics as a people. But it's going away. I got news for you. It's going away. We'll be back right after this. This is a Hal Sparks Radio program, mega worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. WCPT820.com is the website. And of course, Sexy Liberal on the Sexy Liberal, thanks. On the Sexy Liberal Podcasting Network, it's the Hal Sparks Radio podcast, mega worldwide. We'll be back right after this. So one of my favorite parts of this, and there's a lot going on at the G7, they had a bunch of surfers against sewage who paddled out into the water around the gathering and are wearing masks of world leaders, and they're trying to push back against sewage in oceans and the like. By the way, something that all the G7 countries are actually working on. Like, these are the countries that were engaged in the Paris Accord. These are the countries working on pollution. These are the ones actually doing it. None of them are going to do this off the coast of China anytime soon because A, they won't be heard, and B, their lives will be in danger. It's just silly. They will be viewed as foreign marauders and probably, blown from the water. But I appreciate the effort.
But, we don't want sewage. That's good.
Yeah, no. I'm glad they're doing it. They're preaching to the choir, but but I just hope the waves were good. That's, you know what I mean? There's a certain point where, like, most of the protests about the G7 are stuff that, where the desire, at least on face, has been met by a lot of, and the only areas where it wasn't is areas where the Trump administration decided to just undo the progress, including bringing Russia back into the fold, making it the G8 again. The whole story that he was going to have the thing at Mar-a-Lago and that he was going to invite Putin so he could be next door at this, it's just so he could listen through the wall with a brandy glass, like a snifter, right? Whatever. So one of the biggest stories coming out of this is that after this summit that Biden is going to have with Putin, they are not going to have a joint press conference. If you'll recall, the joint press conference that, I think in 2017, like kind of the first one that he had with Putin, is the one where he said, I can't imagine, or whatever, I can't imagine why it would be Russia to go after, right? And basically making every excuse he could, just sitting there nodding at everything that Putin said, and then shaking hands with him palm up the entire weekend, which was this weird, show of weakness thing where it's one thing to just reach over and that's just kind of lazy how your hand falls, but it was a very obvious dog belly moment that he kept doing repeatedly, and I couldn't figure it out. It was one of the, you know what I mean, where you just kind of roll over and show your belly, right? And it's many ways in line with the idea that Trump was like, people will respect my strength, and Obama bowed to the Saudi prince, and then we of course have the gif of not only Trump bowing to get the little medal around his neck, but doing a mild curtsy at the end of it. Remember that little bleep? Like he just does this little, it's adorable.
Now, I imagine you probably covered this in one of your live feeds, but his pants.
Trump's, yes. So for those, yes, the North Carolina Republican Party gathering where
that speech was insane.
Yeah,
I mean, he was barely there.
Yes. And it is just going to get worse. And that's why after it, I tweeted, the GOP holding up Donald Trump as the beacon for the party of the ubermensch of Republican everything is on a collision course with the reality of Trump the man. That no matter what they do to try and lift this guy up as this magical being, I gotta say, he's a mess. He's a mess on all fronts. And he's facing, I don't doubt, that beyond the normality of age, his bad diet, his intellectual incuriosity that would make him, less apt to read or do puzzles or take Preverin or whatever. I think he probably leans more on the Pervitin crowd as far as brain drugs go. That his use of alleged stimulants, which Noel Kassler talks about to no end during his years on The Apprentice and all that those lead to aging you a little faster. Those are always a challenge, right? In your 70s.
Yeah, and they lose their efficacy after a while, which is sort of evident because he's slowing down.
And in many ways, I think on top of that, stress plays a major role in people's lives as far as their physical well-being. And for a guy that was born on third base and thought he had a triple, is a second generation slumlord who turned his father's actual real estate company into effectively a branding organization in less than 5 years as he took it over. The reality is that he's used to winning by accident. He's used to, winning even when he's lost, right?
I don't know why that made me laugh.
He's used to like everybody on the other team loses, stares into the sun when the pop fly is coming their way, the easiest drop shot in the world, and they miss it because, the world, and he thinks it's because he hit a home run and knocked it out of the park. And in this, I think that losing the election as soundly as he did, and the ongoing failures because of it, because he continued to fight it, had he arguably taken this stress on and made it, just dealt with it, in terms of its, the reality that he just lost. If he'd have just taken that one big stress hit that everybody, like we saw Mitt Romney, pumping gas with a beard on the way to San Diego, Gore went into basically hiding.
Yeah, Al Gore, that was the next one. I was like, wait, there's another one. He turned into a gorilla.
Yeah, right. It's got to hit you. You know what I mean? You got to take it on the chin.
Gorilla. Oh my God, there it was the whole time.
Yes. He turned into Al Gorilla, and it's an inconvenient beard, but that's bad enough. But then when you go, you know what? No, I really won, and we'll see by Saturday. By this Saturday, you'll see I actually won. And then, no, I didn't. Well, no, but by the time they certify, they're going to call it for me. It's all going to get turned around. And then that doesn't happen.
You'll see in December.
Yep. And then January and the 6th. And then his own people couldn't do it. Storming the castle. They could. He sent his minions. I mean, if this was an old biblical or, British monarchy story, this would be one of the biggest failed attacks on a castle in history, right? Just miserable. And yet, he continued to he persists with this lie, and every time it hits him, and it's not going further. Like the Arizona one is falling apart hilariously. There's infighting between people who are even more into the recount, whatever they want to call it, the audit, than the people who are doing it, than even the cyber ninjas. And they're arguing about, no, I'm not going to put somebody in place to verify certain things. It just looks worse and worse. And it looks increasingly like the Republicans there may have tried to help Trump win by gussing up the vote a little bit, just goosing it in a direction that they might have helped him. And they're like, dude, don't look in those boxes. Those are all fake Trump votes. Like, it's what it looks like. I don't necessarily believe that's the occurrence, but that behavior-wise, it makes way more sense why the Republicans would push back against their own recount in a lot of ways, because they're afraid that Trump supporters will discover that they actually tried to help him and failed, that the whole story about the algorithm breaking and they had to print more ballots sounds more like a failed Trump endeavor than something that the Dems, who according to the Republicans control the media, control big tech, control U.S. government, the world governments, are managing some sort of major coup of the world, trying to reshape it into some sort of Marxist socialist monstrosity. And they have that power, but somehow it was their algorithm that broke. You know what I mean? Like that makes no sense. So anyways, we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.